There's a cliched phrase, context matters. And I've been wondering of late how accurate that phrase is, right? Does context really matter? And I think the answer is probably yes. Context does matter. But maybe the better question is how much does it matter? Does it matter as much as we typically think it does? Right? And simple example, I'm reading a book now, Predictable Irrationality, by Dan Ariely. And he talks about context and how it matters. And he gives, kind of a simple example of when, I think it was bread machines. When bread machines first came out, whatever that was, maybe the 80s or the 90s, it wasn't a thing before, right? There wasn't a benchmark for that. There wasn't any precedent or history with it. Bread makers were released, and apparently nobody bought them. Nobody, they were priced at like, I don't know, $200 a bread machine, and nobody knew if that was a good price or a bad price. Nobody knew exactly what you would do with it. Nobody knew if it was a good thing to be baking bread at home and if they would be doing that. And the theory is that people were kind of paralyzed by that and said, I don't know what to do with that, right? I don't have enough context. I don't have any benchmarks. I don't have any reference points. I can't work with this. And that makes sense, right? We think about that intuitively. We could say, yeah, I kind of get that. And what they did was, I forget who the company was, but they released a second bread machine, a bigger one that was double the price. And that simple benchmark, that simple reference point to say, oh, there's two now, and there's one that's, $500 or $400, much bigger. I probably don't need that. But the cheaper one, the smaller one, that seems reasonable now. And it does something, right, to the calculation we're doing in terms of if we need the bread machine. That context changes it in some ways. And at first glance, you'd say, well, more data is always good. More inputs is always a good thing. So that's right. That seems right. But it makes me wonder, like, why though? Right? Is there something inherent in it where it's forcing us to be objective because we have no way to be subjective? We don't have any context. We don't know what it is. So we have to kind of assess this thing in many ways the way you should assess all things. You have to really question it. You have to really dig in and understand the pieces. There's nothing you can just, copycat off of and say, okay, it's just like this. And there's no shortcuts. There's no biases. There's nothing. You have to truly try and understand all components of it, think through what it is, what it's worth, what its value could be, what's good about it, what's bad about it. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort, and it's taking a lot of effort exercising muscles that we typically don't like to exercise. So again, not terrible or not ridiculous to think that a benchmark or a reference point helps us and could be good, but I don't think it just helps us. I think we use it as a crutch. We use it as, oh, okay, there's the shortcut I need to make this decision because I don't want to do it on my own. And I think that's problematic. I think, again, it's representative of a lot of the issues we have when we talk about thinking better. It's almost a test, if you will, for people. If you're given something, some data point, some statistic, some new product, some situation, whatever it is that you have no context on, you have no benchmark, you have no reference point, what do you do with it? Can you do anything with it? Can you assess it for what it is, right? Or are you paralyzed by it? If you're paralyzed by it, it probably means you need to really work those muscles. Being objective, being super thoughtful, and aware of how you think and how you assess things and how you analyze things, that's probably not a strong suit. The coronavirus currently is a good example of this, where if somebody were to tell you and you had no other context that 200,000 people died from the coronavirus, many people would say, well, tell me more. I need to know more to know how I should feel about that. How many people die from the flu each year? How many people die from cancer? How old is the average person that's dying? Do they have other health issues? What countries are they from, right? All this stuff starts to play in, and then, okay, now I know how worried or concerned or whatever I should be about it. And again, there's some truth to that. When you're thinking about prioritizing resources and thinking about effort that needs to be put forth to address the issue, context matters, right? Understanding, is this like the flu equivalent or worse? Your response to it, will be dictated by that to some extent. But that's a piece of it. I would argue that for a lot of people, even just the average person, assessing how they should feel about it. Should it impact my day on a regular basis? Should it be something that actually moves me somewhat emotionally or in some way, they would say they need context too. And to that, I think it gets back to the point of why can't you at least do some assessment of that on its own? Like 200,000 people died. Let's assume that number's accurate, right, for the sake of this. 200,000 people died. Sure, it may not be as bad as the flu, or it may be worse. Or it may not be as bad as boating accidents, or it may be worse. But in and of itself, the fact that 200,000 people died, that sucks. That's terrible. Like that's bad news. We should be able to come to that conclusion and say that without needing the context, without needing to understand the specifics. Say, oh, okay, then I'm worried about it, or then I'm not, or then it's an issue, or then it's not. Sure, again, it helps, but if we're just using it as a crutch and a shortcut to make the decision, it probably proves that we're not being objective in how we're thinking about it. And you can kind of go on and on down the list of different instances and examples of this, of how it plays out. And I think for me, it's something that was probably a blind spot, and a logical one, I guess I'll say, an understandable one, right? For all the reasons we talked about already in this video, it seems like more input is always better. It seems like more data is always better, but like every other time we've talked about that in these videos, it is better assuming you know how to weight it effectively, assuming you account for it and assess it and analyze it, incorporate it into your calculation effectively. And I think often when we look for context in situations, we are overweighting it. We are relying too much on that benchmark or that reference point, and it skews us, it biases us in some way.